What's up, guys? Marco here with Front Yard Fantasy, and I am bringing you my team breakdown for the Las Vegas Raiders. All right, guys, before we jump in, I want to remind you, hit me up on Twitter, drop me a follow at Marco_14P. I will answer any questions, dynasty, redraft, fantasy football related that you guys have, whether it's about my videos or something else that you heard or you got questions about, roster questions, anything you want, hit me up. My DMs are always open at Marco_14P. All right, guys, let's jump into it. So we are doing sleepers, breakouts, and bust. I'm going to spoil it and break this video a little bit because here's the reality. When I look at sleepers, when I look at breakouts, the Raiders don't have any. And I know there's some people who are like, well, what about Zamir White? I'll press pause because here's the reality. Zamir White's not going to give you enough fantasy value unless so many people get hurt. So sure, dynasty leagues, throw Zamir White on your taxi squad. Otherwise, I just don't see a way for him to get you any sort of fantasy production. And we're talking redraft really right now. So moving on. I do have a bust, and it is Hunter Renfrow. Obviously, Hunter Renfrow was a good player last year. He was littered with targets after so many injuries to this team that he was basically the only living player left. And you're kind of understanding why I'm going to get here as a bust. Right now, he's going as wide receiver 32 in redraft fantasy football drafts. I have him, after I finish my projections on the season, I have him as my wide receiver 48. And here's the deal. Yes, Hunter Renfrow is a smart football player. Yes, Hunter Renfrow is a very, very good route runner, which is one of the things, if you've listened to my content before, that I say is the thing you want. That's going to extend careers. That's going to help you make decisions between players when you're looking at fantasy value. But Hunter Renfrow is coming into my wide receiver 48 because of this. We know, they added Davante Adams. And there's almost no real path to the volume he saw last year. He's not dropping to, 50 targets, but last year he saw 128 targets on the season. And assuming health for the team, which is what you need to do, really, you can't go in and say, well, Jacobs is going to get hurt. All these guys, you can't do that. And the reality is, with all these guys healthy on the season, even if they were to miss a few games here or there, the highest I could really get Hunter Renfrow to is around 92 targets, because the reality is Davante Adams is going to be the number one target on this team. Darren Waller will be the number 2 target on this team. And then Hunter Renfrow will be the number 3 target on this team. And he will also have to deal with Josh Jacobs, Kenyon Drake, whoever else, Brandon Bolden, whoever else this team is going to throw the ball to. So 92 targets, it isn't the worst thing in the world. But for comparison, if you watch the Charger video, I said that's kind of what Josh Palmer was on pace for last season. And he obviously didn't get to play the whole season at that clip, but that's what he averaged out to. And so ultimately you're looking at a high-end, low-end, really a low-end wide receiver 4 at best. He might have some wide receiver 3, wide receiver 2 weeks, but that's not something that is enough to make me want to draft this player. And I think Hunter Renfrow is one of those guys where people saw last year's production and they're going to be chasing points. If you want to win in fantasy football, you don't chase points. So don't go after Hunter Renfrow, guys. Like I said, people are saying, wide receiver 32, that might be a value. It isn't. Odds are that's probably his ceiling for the season, unless Davante Adams were to get hurt. And we just haven't seen that from Davante Adams, but he's a guy who dominates and commands targets, and Hunter Renfrow does not command targets. And so he's a guy, really, when you're looking at the range of outcomes for Hunter Renfrow, it's bust or bust, unless he drops to, I would say probably wide receiver 40 or lower. I'm not even willing to take a flyer on Hunter Renfrow. This offense isn't going to be built to sustain that many players, that many pass catchers consistently. And when you look at guys who are like 1 or 2 situations away, which is what I usually look for, Hunter Renfrow is more like 3 or 4 things happening. Davante Adams would need to go down, and then he would get a nice bump in targets, but probably not enough. Darren Waller would have to probably miss a lot of time. And then even at that point, you're like, okay, that just barely gets him to where he was last year. And at that point, the touchdown efficiency probably won't be there as well, because that means their whole team's hurt. So I just worry a lot about Hunter Renfrow. He is a strict avoid for the 2022 season for me. And if there's someone in your dynasty leagues, if you're playing in dynasty leagues at all, that still believes that Hunter Renfrow is going to be like a sneaky play, go trade him. For almost anything, go trade Hunter Renfrow. All right, so we obviously have to talk about something on this video outside of Hunter Renfrow. So let's talk about the rest of this team. Derek Carr, Josh Jacobs, Davante Adams, Darren Waller, Kenyon Drake, and Brandon Bolden. We can talk about them a little bit, but it's really interesting because this is a team where when I went to go break them down, I was like, where are the values here? There's no values, but there's also no one that's overpriced. They're all going basically exactly where I would want them to go. Derek Carr is going as QB 13. In my projections, he came out as my QB 15 on the season. So it's a little bit of a drop, but the points there are just so minimal that that's like perfect range. Derek Carr, if you're in a Superflex league, Derek Carr is a phenomenal QB2. If you don't know that already, he's a sneaky play. You know, I would prefer Kirk Cousins over him, but Derek Carr is like right at the very end of that tier of QB2s that I think can probably win you weeks. Let's move on. Josh Jacobs, he's going as RB19. He is actually my RB16 on the season for 2022. So it's a little bit of he's a little bit of a value right now. I think really where he's being undervalued is dynasty leagues. This isn't a dynasty video, but if you can go get Josh Jacobs for super cheap, a couple of seconds or, a 2025 first, if you're able to do that, I would be okay doing that if you're a contender because he's still a young player. He's probably going to be leaving the Raiders after this year, and who knows where he ends up, but I think he might be able to be more efficient somewhere else. But his redraft value, like I said, he's going as RB19. That I think he's going probably 15 to 20 is where he'll end up on the season. And I think 20 is if things go really, really wrong for him. I'm not overly worried about Kenyon Drake. He's not really a value I'm interested in. Like I said, Zamir White, not hyper interested. Brandon Bolden, not super interested. So again, right about the appropriate value. Davante Adams is going as wide receiver 4. I have him as my wide receiver, checking my notes here, wide receiver 6 on the season. So again, right at value. He's going to be the volume and the target hog for this offense. He's going to probably see 130-ish, maybe 135 targets in that range. And they're coming from Derek Carr, not Aaron Rodgers, so it doesn't mean as much. But he's still going to be a volume, at the least a volume play. But he's one of the best wide receivers in the NFL. He's going as wide receiver 4. That's appropriate. Darren Waller is where it's interesting for me. I almost put Darren Waller as a bust. But I couldn't do it because he's going as tight end 5. If he was still going in that tight end, 1 through 4 range, which is a kind of a tier break almost for me, then I would say, he could be a bust. But tight end 5 seems super fair for Darren Waller. I'm looking at the tight end rankings and tight end ADP right now. It's obviously Travis Kelce, Mark Andrews, Kyle Pitts, Kittle, and Waller. That's the order I would have them in. I think Waller is a guy who's going to see less targets with Davante Adams there because they've never had someone just dominate or command the targets that Davante Adams just always has in his entire career. So he's going to see a volume drop. That's going to be a little bit of a knock for him. If he can stay healthy has been a concern for him. So that's another reason where I don't quite have him up in like that top group. George Kittle and Darren Waller are similar to me in that way. I think George Kittle's a little more efficient at this point. But Darren Waller is a guy who, if you're in a PPR league, his volume isn't going to float you as much as it was. He's in that tight end 5 to maybe even 7 range, depending on what happens with Dalton Schultz, depending on what happens with potentially TJ Hawkinson, but really for me, a guy I really believe in Cole Kmet. So I think tight end 5 might be near the top of his value for the season, but it's not unfair, especially from what we've seen from Darren Waller, thus far in his career. All right, guys, if you got questions, like I said, hit me up on Twitter at Marco_14P or drop your questions below. I'd love to get to any and everything I can. If you hate my rankings and you're like, hey, Darren Waller's a huge value, let me know. I want to hear what your guys' thoughts are. Let's talk about it. Thanks for hanging out. We'll see you next time. Peace.